Well, I'm David Coupe, and I am a local solicitor, and I've practiced around Lytham for about 55 years. So that's what I did for a living. I'm still doing it for a living, really. I'm now a consultant with my practice, David Coupe. But I've also done my best to support local charities and organisations. I've enjoyed my career. And as a consultant, I'm still popping into the office, and so that's my professional life, really. But I've also done my best to make the skills that I have learned professionally available to charities and voluntary organisations in and around the Foul Coast. And I served for many years as a board member of the Blackpool Grand Theatre Trust. I was asked by the Civic Society to become involved in the formation of the Lytham Town Trust. And Alan Ashton put his hand up to be the first chair, and I was the secretary. So no, I was really right at the very beginning with the formation of the Lytham Town Trust. About 35 years ago, I think it is now, I was asked to be an inaugural member of the Lytham Town Trust. And I wrote the constitution for the Town Trust and gave advice and assistance to the Town Trust in their first big project, which was the acquisition of the assembly rooms carved out of the former Lytham bars. And so I gave advice and guidance as a board member to the Lytham Town Trust on that acquisition. But Lytham didn't have a parish council. It didn't have a voice for Lytham. And I know this was something that Alan Ashton was very keen on, that this newly formed Lytham Town Trust should be a voice for Lytham. So that was the concept. So it was not just the acquisition of the assembly rooms, it was for the Lytham Town Trust to be a voice for Lytham. So it moved on from there, but it never really became, it didn't widen its compass, because it took on Lytham Hall within a relatively short time after it had acquired the assembly rooms. And taking on Lytham Hall was obviously a big undertaking. So that vision for the Town Trust was really rather relegated to the responsibilities that the Town Trust had taken on with the hall as well as the assembly rooms. When I was sorting out the structure of the Lytham Town Trust, I was guided very much by best practices in the charity sector, and those practices require the newly formed charity to have skills on the board, a range of skills on the board which are needed for the charity to effectually deliver its charitable purposes. So you have to spend quite a lot of time before the charity really takes off to find people with those skills. So you have to advertise those skills and for people to come forward. And to the best of my recollection, this is what we did with the Town Trust. So for example, we had Keith Ingham, who was a notable architect, very experienced architect, who designed, I think, the Preston bus station, amongst other things. And he was with the Building Design Partnership. And so he was invited to come onto the board in order that we could benefit from his design skills, which were really quite important when we were laying out the assembly rooms. And it's looking at the detail of where about lighting and all that sort of thing in order for the assembly rooms to make an impact and do the job. And of course, I had the legal skills, and I think David Coupe was brought on because of his accountancy background, and Alan Ashton was there as chair because he had been very much a prominent part of the Lytham community, and he ran a market garden business, I think, but he was much more than that because he was very interested in the history of Lytham from the time that it was just a small agricultural and fishing community, and then building up during the early to late part of the 19th century, developing as a genteel watering place by the sea. So he wrote quite a lot of articles on the history of Lytham. There were at that time two major employers in and around Lytham. One was Guardian, and the other was British Aerospace, which became BAE Systems. And we were particularly helped by the fact that Dick Evans who was chair of BAE Systems, and he was a local man living in Feckleton. So Frank Rowe wasn't retired, but had been the local managing director of BAE Systems at Wharton. And so he came to the board with all that big business knowledge, which was invaluable to the board in its early period. So it's the people who have been at the high level end of business make enormous contributions to local charities. Alan Bushell was a chartered surveyor, so he had a lot of knowledge about buildings and the value of property and all the rest of it, which were important to that was important to the town trust as well, to have that information, the skills and the information that Alan Bushell was able to provide. And Alan Bushell played a particularly important role in the campaign to subsequently acquire them all. He was invaluable to me, and he was at my side all the time. And we would discuss strategies and information to be put into the public domain. So Alan was very, very important. I think Jeff Burris was on the board, and Jeff Burris had been with the Atomic Energy at Solwick, and he was retired, but he also represented another major employer in the Fylde. So all of these people had their own connections and specialised knowledge, which added value to the town trust in its early period. And when Lytham Town Trust was formed, the creation of the assembly rooms was really a done deal. This was a negotiation that took place before we established the Lytham Town Trust, encouraged by the Lytham Town Civic Society and also the Heritage Group, who had been in conversation with Fylde Council and also with Ashworth Builders, who were wanting to acquire the major part of the former Lytham Bars to undertake a flat development, and it was made clear to Ashworth builders that there had to be some planning gain, and so that planning gain took the form of the creation of the assembly rooms. That didn't cost the council anything. It was pure planning gain. It was the price that Ashworth builders had to pay for being able to acquire the remainder of the site for the flat development. And I think Keith Ingham was involved in discussing the architectural aspects of the assembly rooms. The charity's first project was to acquire free, gratis and for nothing the fully completed assembly rooms and operate them. So a deal had been negotiated with Ashworth Builders in conjunction with the council to create the assembly rooms, and it was to shift the Lytham Yacht Club, which was really just a gentleman's drinking club, from a room that they had in the park, which was to be developed as flats, and so they were transferred to a first floor accommodation, which they still occupy, for the yacht club. And then there had to be sufficient space, the remainder of the first floor, to attract a commercial tenant, and that left the ground floor area available for charities and voluntary organisations to have sessional occupancies. But that had all been negotiated and dealt with before we kick-started the Town Trust, except that I was charged with the task of putting pressure on the council to move this forward. The council were being a bit slow, and they had to be put under some pressure to yield up the completed assembly rooms to the Town Trust. And I forced that through articles and things that I put into the local paper. Said it's about time that the council made a decision about the assembly rooms, what were they going to be doing with them, and hopefully they were going to be handing those over free, gratis and for nothing to the newly formed Lytham Town Trust. So I had that dialogue at that time. They were handed across, and of course, as always, the mayor and other representatives of the council wanted to come along on the opening day and be on a platform with Alan Ashton to celebrate the acquisition by the Lytham Town Trust of the assembly rooms. After that, I have to say it wasn't a particularly challenging experience running the assembly rooms. We already had a tenant with the yacht club, and Barry Fothergill was the first tenant of the remaining space, which was quite generous of him. But he said, well, you know, the Guardian needed a bit more working area, and so he negotiated a lease of the remaining part of the upper floor, which provided the income to subsidise the voluntary uses of the ground floor areas. And that's all it was, really. You know, it's pretty straightforward. I spent 40 years sitting on the board of the Grand Theatre. I learnt a great deal during that time, but I also learnt a great deal about how a community can stand up to a big organisation. I could go on forever about the early history of the Grand Theatre, but it took the friends of the Grand Theatre over 10 years before they were able to actually reopen the theatre and put it back into business again. and have successfully run it ever since. And for me, that experience came back once again when we had news that the Guardian were putting Lytham Hall on the market. And that arose incidentally because Guardian were positioning the company itself for sale to AXA. And so they made a decision at head office level that they wanted to in order to position themselves for a sale to AXA, to get rid of all the non-core assets on the balance sheet. They owned quite considerable agricultural estates in Scotland, and also an agricultural estate here, and Lytham Hall. And they first came to Lytham because of the improvidence of Harry Clifton, who finished up penniless and dead in Brighton. So Guardian took over, because they were a creditor of Harry Clifton. They took over the agricultural land which formed part of the centuries-old Lytham estate in the ownership of the Clifton family, and with this came Lytham Hall. And during that time, for the first time, the community were allowed to actually come into the home park of Lytham Hall and spend time here, which was a very good thing, because everybody knew that Lytham Hall was there, but they weren't able to access it. And so for the first time, when Barry Fothergill was the chief executive for the Lytham operation, he had open days and allowed the public to come in, which was a wonderful thing. And so I was very distressed to learn that Guardian were wanting to sell Lytham Hall. And the Clifton family are, you know, when you're looking at the history of Lytham and Lytham St Anne's, the Clifton family feature large, and they had some very shrewd Scottish agents, 3 generations of Scottish agents, who planned the town of Lytham and then St Anne's before town and country planning legislation came in, and they had very, very strong ideas about how Lytham St Anne's should develop, with its wonderful Lytham Green and the seafront and all the rest of it. And it was very much a planned community, and they particularly wanted it to be different to Blackpool. Didn't want Lytham St Anne's to have the brashness of Blackpool. They wanted it to be a genteel, you know, sort of community for all classes of people, as they used to say in the 19th century. So, you know, the Clifton family are very, very much part of the history of Lytham. And so what really shocked me about the decision to sell Lytham Hall and put it into private ownership, which would have meant that the community here would once again not have any access to the hall, seemed to me to be totally unacceptable, and that it was something therefore that we should campaign against. Once this news broke, we were in competition with a whole host of well-heeled private buyers, and we didn't have a lot of time. I forget what the time period was, but it was only something like about 3 or 4 months to put together a bid for the hall. So this was discussed at board level with the Lytham Town Trust, and I think the general feeling sitting around the board table was that it was unthinkable really for us to be for the town trust to actually buy the hall because we didn't have the funds. We'd only recently acquired the assembly rooms and the funds weren't there. That was a decision that I didn't agree with, really based on my knowledge and history of the Grand Theatre in Blackpool, where it had been clearly demonstrated that a community could actually achieve things. And I felt that the Lytham community could do the same thing. So I put my hand up to lead a campaign in the name of the Lytham Town Trust for the acquisition of Lytham Hall from Guardian. And so the key word is community. A lot of people around Lytham wanted to come on board and do what they could to acquire Lytham Hall in competition with private buyers. And so it wasn't just the Lytham Town Trust, it was also the Friends of Lytham Hall that immediately formed. It was led by my wife Marion, but there were also other people involved. Bob Smith, who is now a board member at the Lytham Town Trust, and Margaret Race. They were the core people who ran a Friends campaign to increase awareness of what was happening. And we didn't have the money, so really the strategy behind it, was to increase public awareness. And in those days, 30 odd years ago, you didn't have the social media that we have now. And so the local press were all important, the Livingston Towns Express and the Blackpool Gazette and local radio stations and that sort of thing. So week after week after week, during the whole of this campaign period, we posted things on to those media organisations. I made sure that letters were written into the Livingston Towns Express every week, and then there were responses to those letters, and a big dialogue started up. Most people who wrote letters to the press were supportive, but there were some who were saying, "You're wasting your time. You're not going to be able to buy the hall. Why are you spending all this time in competition with private buyers?" But we persevered, and I had confidence in the strategy because of my experience with the Grand Theatre. So we pressed on, and obviously there was some fundraising. There were barbecues and coffee mornings and all the usual things that communities do. So all those things were happening, but we had to raise around about £1 million to buy Lytham Hall. That was the indicative asking price for the hall, and we were in competition, as I say, with private buyers. There was even a proposal in the sales brochure that the hall could host a new golf club with additional land to be made available by Guardian. I mean, it was just outrageous, really. So that's really what that was the competition that we faced. And Jeff Burris was also very supportive and helpful of the campaign that I was running to acquire Lytham Hall. It was notably Alan Bushell and Jeff Burris who gave support to me. So we had low moments as well as high moments. You had periods, and I had experienced that also with with the theatre, you have low moments when you feel, all the odds are against you. It's not going to work, and you get a bit depressed. And it's good to have other people around you who lift your spirits and say, it's going all right, David. So, it was great having those two supporting me in that early period. But I have to say also that it's important, talking about the acquisition of Lytham Hall, it's important also to emphasise the contribution, the huge contribution made by the people who were running the Friends group. They were not on the board of the Town Trust, but they really were the people who got out and about and made it known within the community that the hall was on the market and that we needed large numbers of people to support the campaign. It was a long campaign. It went on and on and on, with a lot of some negative criticism from that came into the media and so forth, that we would never achieve what we're seeking to achieve, and we hadn't even begun to put together enough money to buy the hall. So there were questions being asked. Why are you bothering with this? Because you're never going to be able to compete with the private buyers. And our answer to that was, Lytham Hall belongs to the community. It should be available to the community to enjoy and use. It's part of our heritage. So that was the answer to that. And we are not going to give up. We're going to carry on, and we're going to carry on right the way through to the 11th hour, the 11th day, or whatever it is. We're carrying on, and we're not going to stop. We had correspondence exchanges with the Heritage Lottery Fund to see whether they would be willing to provide the funding. And of course, anybody who deals with the Heritage Lottery Fund knows how tortuous that procedure is, how long it takes. But we put a foot in the door. There was a correspondence exchange, and they responded and said, well, you're going to have to put a business plan together and all the rest of it. And we really didn't have time to do all that. But that was basically what we were saying in public, that we were going to make an application to the Heritage Lottery Fund to fund the purchase price of the hall for community use. And we got to the stage when the Guardian were wanting tenders for the purchase of the hall. And so I had to draft a carefully worded tender to say, will you please give us the opportunity, will you please give us the time and the distance to acquire the hall. We haven't got the funds now. It shouldn't go into private ownership. The hall should be enjoyed by the entire community. Please give us that opportunity. And that was the wording to the tender. So we tendered £1 million purchase price for the hall, but there was a condition attached to it that it was be subject to Heritage Lottery funding. So that tender went in with other tenders in competition with private buyers. And that was a nail-biting experience. You actually have to live through that sort of time with all the work and endeavour and publicity and barbecues and fundraising activities over a period of several months, and we just had to keep people optimistic about it, but it was very, very difficult, and the odds were against us really, unless, and this was really what we were hanging on, Guardian would take note of the fact that the community didn't want the hall to be sold to private ownership. They wanted it to go to the Lytham Town Trust, so for community pleasure and use. And so we were basically appealing to them as one of the two major employers in the area, so Guardian and British Aerospace, that they would actually give us that time, that they would stop the process, not sell to private buyers, and give the Lytham Town Trust the time and the opportunity to raise the funds to buy the hall for the public benefit. So that's where we were positioned until we were within, I think it was about 48 hours only of the deadline for tenders. And I was sat in my office. I will remember this to my dying day. I was sat in my office and I received a call from British Aerospace. And so I took the call. Still emotional about it now, really. I took the call and they said, you, David Coupe, we understand you were running this campaign to buy Lytham Hall, and we want to give you some assistance. And I said, well, our tender has gone in. I can't, I don't know whether, we're going to be given the time to raise the funds, but it's very kind of you to indicate your support, and we'll let you know the outcome. And the person that I spoke to said, I don't think you quite understand what we're actually proposing for you. I said, well, what is it? And they said, we will provide £1 million to buy the hall. I was just completely emotional about it. And so, as I am still, and so that was the defining moment after all the many hours and time that had been spent by so many people, not just the Town Trust, but also, I must emphasise, the Friends group have been doing a marvellous job. All this endeavour, and we had got the fairy godmother there, willing to make our bid credible. And so I said, they said, I wonder if you could trouble yourself to come and see us this afternoon. So I went to see them and had a long chat with the people there, and they said, we'll give you a letter to support your bid, and we'll meet all the attendant costs of acquisition and all the rest of it. She would just let us have details of the costs and expenses that you're incurring. Dick Evans, who was the chair of BAE Systems, he was the person who had made the decision to come to the rescue as a major local employer. Well, yes, I think Frank Rowe wanted to low profile this at the time, and sadly, of course, Frank is now died, but he didn't want it to be known that he'd had the conversation at that time. But Frank had the conversation with Dick Evans. I think it was actually at the Open Golf, which had taken place a few weeks earlier. And say, would you consider giving some help to the Town Trust by Lytham Hall? And I was told by Frank that Dick Evans was able to make that decision on his own initiative. It's for a big company like British Aerospace. He had the power to make individual decisions for what were looked upon as relatively small amounts of money, and he made that decision. And there it was. And so we communicated an unconditional offer, and it was accepted. I mean, I think the Guardian could not have refused our tender. So all the local endeavour, from the community, they had to accept that. That's where it was, and so we acquired the hall, and we were then invited to meet with representatives from Guardian at the Clifton Arms shortly after all this was announced, and they came up with the package of other assets that they wanted the Town Trust to acquire. And I think that was really just a tidying up job, because they had acquired all the property interests of the Clifton estate when they foreclosed on the estate and came to Lytham. Part of the package of things that came across to the Town Trust were the ground landlord's interest in Lytham Cricket Club. So that had restrictive covenants on it and that sort of thing. So all that moved across to the Town Trust. There were bits of woodland, other spare bits of land around the place, houses that had been in the occupation of tenants of the Clifton estate, a whole ragbag of things, and a lot of ground rent interests. And so that was all made available. They technically said, well, it's a condition of your purchase of Lytham Hall that you take all these interests from us. But they were made available on pretty soft financial terms. So I think that was really an indirect contribution from Guardian. They were really supporting everything that we were trying to do. And so it was really like a sort of small endowment to go with, smallish endowment to go with the acquisition of the hall. I think that the trust has a very valuable role to play for the quality of life of residents and visitors to the town, which are really some of the principles that that inspired the gift of Lytham Green and the seafront, these other areas by the Clifton estate. It's to make Lytham a very special place, a place where people want to reside and to visit and all the rest of it. So this is all about the built-in natural environment of Lytham, and I think that the Town Trust has a very valuable role to play there, probably in concert with other organisations in the town, including the aspirations of Lytham Voice, and in respect of the Institute and the seafront and all these other areas that demand money, to keep them going and to give everybody a good experience living in Lytham or visiting the town.